Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about the ultimate tightrope walk, that incredibly delicate balance between public safety and your civil liberties. We're going to unpack the core constitutional and systemic issues that completely define modern policing, from the gritty realities on the ground to the complex legal frameworks governing literally every move an officer makes.
So it really all boils down to this one foundational question. How do we balance keeping our communities safe while fiercely protecting individual constitutional rights? Finding that perfect equilibrium is a constant swing back and forth. And to really understand how we navigate it, we first have to know the rules of the game.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Policing and the Constitution. 2. Discretion, ethics, and corruption. 3. Racial profiling in policing. 4. Navigating use of force. And 5. Legitimacy, trust, and stress. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. Policing and the Constitution.
Okay, so the absolute bedrock requirement here is probable cause. This is the shield that prevents unreasonable searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. You see, an officer can't just act because they've got a weird vibe or a gut hunch, right? They must articulate a specific, precise reason why they believe a crime has been or is about to be committed. And that is the exact standard required to get a warrant from a judge.
Now, this creates a massive, and I mean massive, tension in our justice system. On one hand, we have the exclusionary rule. If an officer gathers evidence improperly, like without a valid warrant or probable cause, it becomes the fruit of the poison tree. It gets thrown out of trial completely, which is a really powerful check on police behavior. But on the flip side is the good faith exception. If an officer made an honest mistake, say executing a flawed warrant they reasonably believed was valid at the time, well, the evidence might still be allowed. It's a constant tug-of-war between strict due process and practical crime control.
Warrants are the standard, sure, but officers can legally conduct warrantless searches in a few very specific situations. For example, if an individual simply gives consent, boom, no warrant needed. Then there are emergency or exigent circumstances. That's when evidence might be easily destroyed or someone's safety is in immediate jeopardy. There just isn't time to wait for a judge. Finally, we have the Carroll Doctrine. Because cars are highly mobile and can quickly transport or dispose of evidence, officers actually have a fair amount of leeway to search vehicles without a warrant under certain conditions.
Shifting gears to the Fifth Amendment and the landmark 1966 Miranda v. Arizona case. We all know the TV version of this, right? You have the right to remain silent. But this literally changed the game for policing. It shifted the whole system toward a due process model, ensuring that citizens actively know their rights before an interrogation. The second a suspect invokes their right to an attorney, police questioning has to stop immediately.
Section 2. Discretion, ethics, and corruption.
Having legal rules on paper is one thing, but enforcing them as a human being out on the street, that's a whole different story. Officers have an immense amount of discretion, which is totally necessary for them to do their jobs effectively, but it also creates some incredibly complex ethical dilemmas. Think about it. A police officer is out on patrol, mostly without a supervisor watching their every single move. If you get pulled over for speeding, that officer has the discretion to give you a ticket or maybe just a warning. We want them to have that flexibility. But this lack of minute-to-minute oversight, combined with a ton of power, definitely opens the door to unethical behavior.
When we hear police corruption, we usually picture the meat eaters, the officers actively extorting people or aggressively hunting for bribes. But here is a wild finding from the Knapp Commission. It's actually the passive grass eaters who are more detrimental to law enforcement as a whole. Because these grass eaters passively accept corruption or just conveniently look the other way, they allow unethical behavior to become a deeply entrenched, normalized part of a department's culture.
Section 3. Racial profiling in policing.
Let's look straight at the data to examine one of the biggest flashpoints in modern law enforcement. Legally, case law like Ren v. United States allows officers to use minor traffic violations as a pretext to investigate other suspicions. But the research data highlights a pretty stark reality regarding demographic disparities. Surveys show that 25% of Black adults report having interactions with police, and 32% of surveyed minorities felt they were treated unfairly. Plus, statistics show white drivers are more likely to receive simple warnings during traffic stops compared to their minority counterparts. To objectively monitor and try to reduce these disparities, departments are increasingly relying on mandated procedures alongside body and dashboard cameras.
Section 4. Navigating use of force.
This topic is incredibly emotional and highly visible in the media, so the actual numbers here might surprise you. Threats, or the actual use of physical force, occur in only about 3% of all police contacts. Just 3%. The vast majority of police work is actually just routine calls, paperwork, and keeping the peace through communication.
When force is used, legally, cases like Tennessee v. Garner lay out the rules. Force has to be an absolute last resort, aiming only for the minimum level needed to achieve compliance. Actually, this goes all the way back to the foundational principles of policing. If an officer can get compliance just by talking to a suspect, then any physical force beyond that is technically excessive, and deadly force is strictly constrained. An officer cannot use it simply to stop someone from running away unless they have probable cause that the escaping suspect poses a significant, deadly threat to the officer or the public.
But here's the flip side of the coin. The post-9/11 militarization of local departments has drawn a lot of critique for escalating routine situations and driving a wedge between communities and the officers meant to protect them. With access to military hardware, assault rifles, and tactical vehicles, critics argue that local police sometimes look more like an occupying force. When heavily armed officers roll up to a relatively low-level offense, it naturally cranks up the anxiety and stress levels for everyone involved, and that heightened tension can cause people to behave erratically, which ironically increases the likelihood that force will actually be used.
Section 5. Legitimacy, Trust, and Stress.
For our final section, let's look at how all these dynamics play out. Police legitimacy is a crucial two-way street. Cops literally cannot do their jobs without the public. They rely on us to report crimes and act as witnesses. When community trust corrodes, the entire system just breaks down. Today, this legitimacy is heavily challenged by legal shields like qualified immunity. This is a doctrine that protects officers from civil liability unless they violate a clearly established constitutional right. Because courts frequently side with public officials on this, it creates some really deep frustration in communities who feel like there's a lack of accountability.
And we absolutely have to acknowledge the heavy, unique toll of occupational stress on the officers themselves. Policing is basically long periods of routine boredom, completely interrupted by specks of extreme, high-stakes danger. Historically, the hyper-masculinized culture of policing just told officers to man up and deal with it. That is highly corrosive. As a result, law enforcement has some of the highest professional rates of depression, alcohol abuse, and suicide. Providing robust psychological care, mentorship, and stress management isn't just some nice perk. It is an absolute necessity to prevent that stress from manifesting into unethical behavior or excessive force out on the streets.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder regarding the future of our criminal justice system. We've seen how constitutional laws, human ethics, and systemic stressors all collide in the world of policing. Acknowledging these issues isn't about being anti-police, it's about pushing for a more professional, ethical, and effective system. How can society build a system that equally protects those who serve and those who are served? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those hard questions.